Okay, I'm here with Charlene Obernauer, who's the executive director of NYCOSH. For those who don't know, that's the New York Committee for Occupational Health and Safety. Charlene, thanks so much for spending some time with me today.
Of course. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
So, NYCOSH just released its annual report, which is titled Deadly Skyline. And this year's report, I believe, analyzed the most recently available figures, which are from the year 2022. Is that correct?
Correct.
One of the things I noticed looking through the report from this year is that a disproportionately high number of the construction fatalities from that year were Latino construction workers. Could you speak a little bit about that finding and perhaps some of the potential underlying causes of it?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So we have seen, and this is pretty consistently throughout the years of doing this report, that in New York State, about 10% of New York State's workers are Latino, but in 2022, about 25.4% of the fatalities were of Latino workers. So what that basically means is that you have a number that is composed of Latino workers on every construction job site, but more Latinos are dying on the job than those that actually are composed of workforces on the job site, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's a disturbing finding, obviously. What do you
hmm
believe could be some of the underlying reasons for that finding? Why is it such a disproportionately high number?
I think that unfortunately, some contractors take advantage of Latino workers. I think that they think that, especially if somebody doesn't have work authorization or if they don't have documentation to be here legally, that they can put these workers in some of the most dangerous occupations there are, and that they can basically not provide them with the kind of safety training or safety equipment that is necessary on the job. And you read about a lot of these stories and it's like a worker who wasn't, provided with a harness, or it's like, there was, as we know, falls are the top cause of deaths in construction sites. And so you'll see, there was maybe, a piece of scaffolding that wasn't erected properly and somebody fell through it. And, these are pretty basic ways to adjust your kind of safety and health on the job site. And a lot of contractors who are exploiting workers will cut corners, and they oftentimes will cut corners when it comes to Latino workers' safety, especially if those workers are undocumented.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Unfortunately, that there's a logic
Mhm.
to that, and I'm certainly glad that you and your organization are shining a light on the data, identifying the problem, and then hopefully we work on the solution.
Thank you.
So another thing that the report noted, it focused on New York City, and New York City had 24 construction deaths in the year 2022, about
hmm
two a month. And again, that number, first of all, it's up from the prior year, and it represents about full half of all of the construction deaths from the entire state. But, New York City, as we know, has the most regulations, the strictest
hmm
regulations. And
hmm
despite that, it seems that fatalities in the city certainly aren't decreasing, in some cases are increasing. Um,
Right.
what do you think that's about? If you could speak a little bit about the New York City piece of this.
Yeah, well, what concerns me about the New York City data is that whenever there is a relationship between a decrease in an enforcement agency's budget and an increase in injuries or an increase in fatalities, that is concerning to me. And so in New York City, we have seen a decrease in the Department of Buildings budget. And, I think I've said this repeatedly, but my job is not to shame agencies. I know a lot of great people who work for these agencies. They do a lot of amazing, amazing projects, but you can't operate with the same safety, the same number of safety professionals on a lower budget, especially when you're talking tens of millions of dollars. So we would like to see that budget brought back up. We'd like to see safety be a priority. And I think that in terms of the trend in New York City, we're always concerned when we see a trend, especially now it's been 3 years going. And I think that New York City is a very dangerous place to work as a construction worker. I mean, sometimes I don't know if you guys are on TikTok or any of these like Instagram or anything, but you see some of these videos that construction workers themselves post, and they're scary. And it's not just because they're scary because they're working from heights. They're scary because oftentimes they're working with from heights without the adequate protections in place. And so I think that, the common person can, just like access some of these videos, and you see just how dangerous it can really be if you don't have the proper protections in place.
It's a good point. It's another reason why social media is not necessarily all bad. Sometimes it
Yeah,
exposes things that otherwise people like you and me might not be seeing. And
exactly.
I I think that the report, as you mentioned, talked about New York City Department of Buildings and also OSHA
Hmm.
really being concerned about funding and staffing levels,
Hmm.
both, right?
Absolutely. And I think that we always say we're OSHA's biggest defender as well as its biggest critic. Like I said with DOB, we have a lot of great people at OSHA. We think it's an amazing agency. The purpose, the founding behind that agency is actually founded because of, the labor movement advocating for safety and health. So there's a bit of a delicate line between us saying OSHA needs to do more and us saying, well, OSHA stinks and anything like that. So from our perspective, it's more along the lines of like, we want to see OSHA's budget doubled. We used to say we want to see OSHA's budget increase, but now we're like, no, double it. Like, it's not enough to just increase the budget. We need to see a dramatic prioritization of safety and health in this country, and that starts with OSHA.
Got it. And speaking of the labor movement, another finding was 90% of the construction deaths happened on non-union job sites. Could you
Mm-hmm.
talk a bit about that, please?
Absolutely. And again, this is data that's the same every single year. It's consistent. This year was the 90% figure is very high. Usually it hovers around 80%, but this is 90%, and that's focused on New York City. And I think that when you look at unionized job sites, most skilled construction workers can tell when a job site is union versus non-union just from looking at the job site and looking at what the conditions are on the job site, right? So a lot of our staff, if you were to show them, you wouldn't show them the hard hats with the union logos, but you just showed them, the actual conditions on a job site, you could say, oh, that's probably a non-union site, or oh, that's probably a union site. And it's because a lot of the non-union contractors, and I don't want to say all, but a lot of the non-union contractors, unfortunately, don't have as highly skilled of a workforce. Apprenticeship programs in the building trades can be 2-3 years long. Before you're even a full staff member of that organization, before you are a full union member, before you're, actually brought into the union. So that training is really essential. You talk about experience, you talk about, what it really means to be an expert on the field. And these guys are experts and these women are experts, they know what they're doing. And that's because of, I think, of a lot of the great training programs that the building trades has and that the unions have.
Right. Now, that's good evidence for training works.
Yes, absolutely.
So another thing that we believe works, but I'd like to throw it to you is
Yeah.
we do have several requirements as you've said in place in New York State and New York City in terms of licensing to do certain types of work, safety programs. In New York, we have the scaffold law, labor law section 240, which I know you're
Mhm.
familiar with. So from
Mhm.
your perspective, what would these construction fatality numbers look like without those measures in place in New York?
Yeah, I'd hate to see that. I mean, it would be scary. I think that New York City is, as we all know, it's a unique place. It's a unique place to do business. It's a unique place to do construction. Has some of the tallest buildings in the United States, some of the tallest buildings in the world. And these are really dangerous working conditions for workers. And when you have something like the scaffold safety law, when you allow workers as well as their families, if they've died on the job, the ability to really take action against their employer or the site owner if they fall from heights. This is really essential because you know how important it is and how essential it is because you see such an effort to try to overturn it from the employers associations, and sometimes that can be a sign of like, hey, like, why don't these folks like it? Well, because it's effective, and because they don't necessarily want to always be in the position where workers do have that right on the job and workers do have that right and that kind of counterbalance. You think about like the scales of justice. This kind of evens out the scales of justice. It puts a little bit of weight in the workers' corner, and I think that sometimes employers don't like that.
Well, Charlene, I really appreciate the work you're doing, the work NYCOSH is doing, and I really appreciate you spending some time with me here today. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and same to you. Congratulations on all of your great work as well.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.